We have this idea that sharing things and having communal anything means that you're poor, right? When in reality, I know that for us, for my family, being communal about some things, especially financially, has been a positive indicator of wealth for us, right? Because it's really easy to have a stay-at-home mom when you still have two incomes, right? It's a little harder to have a stay-at-home mom when that means there's only one income paying the bills.
Oh, welcome back to Open Late Podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Esfandiary. And this week I have with me Chaneé Jackson Kendall, who is a Black polyamorous queen. I have to say that before I say activist, content creator, event planner, educator, so many things. I found Chaneé actually on Remodeled Love. She was doing an Instagram takeover for Jessica and the Day Lovers. And I was instantly struck by how you spoke about living polyamory versus like practicing polyamory in an ideal way. Like, okay, this is what I want to do, but you are like fully putting this into your life in the way that you raise your kids, in the way that you do your work, and you present yourself in the world. And I've yet to see anyone do it at your level, really, besides Jess. And so, as I'm about to become a mother, selfishly, I'm like, I want to know everything that this woman has to share. So, what better way than to have you on the show? Welcome to Open Late Podcast, Chaneé.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me here and for seeing me. Part of the work that I feel called to do in this space is really to stand on the other side of the theory of polyamory and talk about what the reality of being a Black polyamorous person, what that means, what that looks like, and how much the reality of polyamory differs from the theory of it. So you kind of that's exactly one of the reasons why I'm here.
Amazing. I would love to dive right into like what that is in okay, so somebody hears that high level. Okay, the theory of polyamory versus the reality. So what is the theory that most
Right.
people are living?
I think so. The theory of polyamory is like, oh, there's abundant love and everyone loves everyone. And, I can have these relationships in this utopia, and that is what it will be like. Right.
Mm,
And a lot of times people kind of have conversations about polyamory in the clouds. And I like to have conversations about polyamory on the ground, right?
yeah.
What does that mean? What does it actually look like? What skills do you need to make that work long term? Those are the kind of
Mm,
conversations that I want to have.
amazing. Now, how did this become so important to you? Because I imagine that on your journey, you started to realize that maybe, I mean, for myself, I can only speak for me, but it was like, okay, I had certain ideals. And then once the situations came into my life where I could live them, the things that I wanted versus what my partner wanted versus what was actually going to be applicable in our lives were different. And so I started to see that when, I fell in love with a woman and wanted her around all the time. So, what was it in your journey where you were like, "Oh, okay, this is like a theory, but maybe this doesn't work in my life." And maybe what were some of those like big touch points that had you say, "Okay, there are kind of two different things happening here."
Right. I think the first part is that I realized very early on that the way that I wanted to live polyamory and the representations of polyamory that I saw were not the same. The other thing is that my husband and I have been together for 15 years and we've been married for 9 years. And most of the people who were talking about polyamory um, had not been polyamorous prior to marriage, right?
Mm.
So my husband and I were polyamorous when we got married. We had our partners by our side at our wedding ceremony. And so I wanted to represent that not everyone choosing polyamory was switching from monogamy. Monogamy has not
Mm.
been the overarching default of our relationship. We had, in 15 years, we may have had stretching it 3 years of that being not monogamous at all. And so it just wasn't our story. And so I
Yeah.
wanted to present what our story was, and that there are other options. And we don't have to do this whole like hierarchical, like, I'm letting you do this thing and I'm unlearning everything about what being monogamously married mean. I think there's a lot of people telling that story, and I think that's good for the people that it applies to. But I want it to kind of be a voice that says, "Hey, there's another way." Um,
Mm.
so that was like the
Now,
first touch point.
okay. What were you? So, were you exploring polyamory or not some version of non-monogamy before even meeting your husband?
Well, no, I met my husband. I actually met my husband it's a very cute story, guys. I met my husband on the very first day of college.
Oh,
So we actually we did an immersion program for minorities at the PWI that we went to. And we met there. So we were aware of each other very early when we were 18 years old, or I was 18. He wasn't even 18 yet. And then we were friends for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. We started dating. We dated very briefly our sophomore year of college. And we realized that the connection that we have could be forever, but we're not ready for forever yet. And so we both went and dated other people, with this kind of silent understanding that we'd be back. And
mm,
then in our final year of college, we got back together, and we've been together ever since.
got it.
So what happened was, after college, we lived separately. We lived in two different states. And during that time, we began exploring different kinds of non-monogamy,
Hmm.
and have been doing so ever since.
Wow. So this deep understanding that from early on that you were life partners and that you would return.
Right. And it sounds so like cliche, but that is genuinely our story.
Mm,
We knew, sometimes like it's like when you know, but we
yeah.
also didn't want to fuck it up, right? A lot of times when you find it was a situation of meeting the right person at the wrong time, right? And
Hmm.
if anyone, if you just so happen to be listening and you feel like you may be with the right person, it's the wrong time, leave. Cut it off now before you mess it up to the point where you can't come back.
Yes. Wow. That's
Take a minute,
sage
go
advice.
be who y'all need to be for each other and for yourself, and then come back. Because when we met each other as idealistic teenagers, and we came back
Hmm.
together as young adults with a plan.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
and
so beautiful.
that foundation, for not just our non-monogamous lives, but our careers and our family, and all of that was laid very early on.
Wow. In when I hear that, especially from someone, who's full on practicing and living this, very open poly lifestyle, it's like, oh, that's almost in itself like a sprinkling of non-monogamy because you already had a connection and a bond. And I imagine that even in those years apart, well, actually, let me ask you, was there like a knowingness in both of you that you would come back together?
Oh, that's a spicy question. I'm a little bit of a woo girl, so we're just gonna say that I always
Yeah.
knew. Um, I think that he's not woo at all, and I think that he would probably say he knew too. Um, so I would say I knew. I didn't know that
Mm,
it would go this far, but I knew that our story wasn't over, right?
right.
I knew that our story wasn't over. And so when we got back together in early 2009, I think officially, um we had talked at that point. We had already talked about like having a child together and what that child might be like. And,
Yeah.
I envisioned what changing my last name might feel like. I actually had a moment yesterday. I was just like signing the check at a restaurant. And I looked down and I said, there were days you prayed for this, right? There were days when just signing your name with his last name was a thing, right? Like that's
Yeah.
something that you always wanted. So
Mm,
that was important for me. But my my relationship with my husband, I think, is a secondary storyline to what has pushed me into polyamory. I really think what it is more so the way that I do friendships, and my queerness is what has made me embrace polyamory in the way that I have.
mm,
Um, because I've had to accept like what being queer meant, right? Like I fell madly in love with a woman 6 months before he and I got married.
Mm.
And I knew that I always knew that I was bisexual. And I'm one of those people who never thought I was straight, right? Like it just
Yeah.
never occurred. But I didn't know that I could fall so madly, deeply, like I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I didn't know that this idea of having multiple life partners would be something that was important to me. So once I
Mhm.
met my co-parent, and I was like, oh, this is life change. It was a life changing love for me.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, well, how the hell do I do this? And I started, I'm a nerd, so I was like, well, you start researching, right? And what I found,
Mm.
and that's how I found my friend Evita, right?
Oh,
Um,
yes.
but that was it. That was the only person who looked like me, who had any kind of similar story, any kind of desire. And eventually, what you realize is that it's going to have to be you. That if
Yeah.
there's no one else speaking up about it, if there's no one else writing the rules, if there's no one else teaching people how to do it, I was like, well, I've made all these mistakes. I've done it all these wrong ways. I kind of am being called to share all the wrong things I've done and the way
Mhm.
that we've kind of navigated through it and figured it out. And so now I'm sharing, we figured out some stuff, right? It's like we've crossed level 1 and level 2, and as we get to level 3 and we figure out, now we're trying to think about like, what does saving for our child's future look like with
Mm.
multiple financial kind of configurations, right? What does it look like for him to inherit things from all of our families? Like those are the kind of conversations that we're having right now.
Yeah. Wow. So beautiful. And we jumped to like present, but I want to go back and talk about also, sorry, I wanted to mention, you mentioned Evita. And for those of you listening, if you haven't caught this episode yet, we had her back on the show. Oh my gosh, like almost a year ago now, which means we're due. We've to have her back, but it's episode 37. And we really dive into some of the same topics we're going to talk about today, like polyamorous parenting and how to navigate, multiple children and multiple partners. And it was like, yeah, scratching the surface. And I feel
Right, and
like,
shameless plug,
um,
Avita's book is currently
yeah,
available for pre-order, and I wrote the foreword, so go get it. Go order it. There we
you
go.
did?
I did.
Oh, that's so exciting. So we will link that in the show notes too. Um, yeah, incredible human. We met through like a Burning Man community
That's awesome.
and years ago. And I didn't even realize that she was like polyamorous. And I think at the time, I don't even know if I was publicly, no, I was. It was in 2019. So I had just came out like to my Burning Man community, and that was it, about, being non-monogamous and queer, and what an accepting community. I mean, and then I started to just follow her because we were at a meeting for diversity and inclusion that had nothing to do with openness, and I
Right.
followed her on Instagram and then realized that she creates all this content that I was like, oh my gosh, no one's talking about this, and I felt like so taboo. And then to see her educating on it, I was like, okay, this is amazing. So anyway, we'll put that on the shelf for now. I would love to hear about the early years of intentionally creating a polyamorous life, because you said, you started to do the research, you found one person, and
Right,
that led you to say, okay, it's going to be me, which I
right.
love. I
It's
feel
gonna
like I
be
see a
me.
lot of myself in that, of like, okay, I don't really see a lot of this being said or being shared or being educated or people just being real about, like, it's not going to be pretty.
Right,
um, so how did you navigate that? So you fall in love with a woman and you move into, marrying your husband with
right,
your partner there, I'm guessing.
right,
How did the three of you start to, or maybe there are more partners, take us on the journey
right.
of
So,
having this life in a public way in the beginning?
well, I mean, the thing about it is our life is not public, right? But we are who we are everywhere we go. And I think that's a very it's a line that I hold very close to me. And what that means is that what you know about my life is and will always be what I choose to share, right? And what that means is that you know that I have multiple partners because nobody that doesn't know that is feeding, fucking, or financing me. Therefore, it's not hidden information, right? I'm a grown ass woman, as are
Yeah.
my partners. But I think it's important to talk about the fact that I am a polyamorous educator, but they are all in relatively conservative careers, right? And
Mm.
so and just when we even talk about personality wise, even outside of their careers, they don't have large social media presences. They don't talk about their business a lot on the internet. And so I intentionally walk a fine line of sharing my life in honesty and truthfulness without telling their business on the internet because that's important to me, right? Now, of
Mm.
course, being in relationship with me does mean that there are some things about our life that are public. But again, it's all Googleable, right? And it's going to be in the book.
Yeah.
So what when we first started building our life, it was in we didn't know at the time where my personal career path would take me, but we knew that we didn't want
Mhm.
to hide or lie, right? So she moved
Yeah.
in with us shortly before I gave birth. She lived in another city at the time, so she moved to our city, and in April, our son was born a month early in June. So, we had like 2 months of adjustment time to living together, and then we had a baby. And thankfully, I was
Wow.
able to stay home with baby um, for, I think maybe 18 months or so before I even thought about going back to work. And so
Oh,
that was
beautiful.
that was like an adjustment period for us. But, that had been something I had always wanted. My parents, first of all, I was raised in a tradition of love. I think it's always important to say that I am incredibly relationally blessed. My parents have been married for
Mm.
48 years. Um, and
Wow.
we are
Incredible.
all yeah, we are, and my family and I are very close, like, to this day. I'm always asking, like, "How often do y'all talk to your sisters?" Because me and my sisters are kinda clingy, and we talk to each other, like, a couple times a day, right? So, I am
Mhm.
surrounded by love, even in spite of our differences and the different ways that we've chosen to live our lives. My family is very close, and so having a very close family, chosen, and otherwise, is something things that were important to me. So
Mm.
and the thing is, we met when our son was 3 months old. You're gonna start to notice a theme. My partner and I fell madly in love with another woman. And so my son has had four parents as long as he's been aware. Um,
Mm.
she she we both fell in love with her. She lived in another city, and shortly after his first birthday, she moved here so that we were all in the same city with our child. So all that really means is that our son is literally the luckiest human being on the planet because he has four
Hell yeah.
parents who are involved in his life on a daily and active basis. Um, and that
Mm.
and I think the most important thing to all of us, right? Our polycule is absolutely centered around our child. We all joke that like none of us believes in hierarchy or has a primary partner, but like it's really our son, right? Like our son is
Yeah.
the reason why we're here. He's the reason why we maintain our family the way that we do. We want him to feel secure and happy. And the reality
Mhm.
is the way that our current society is set up, like even with lots and lots of money, two parent households are largely not happy. And that's
Yeah.
just the reality. And a lot of
Mhm.
the happiness and peace that my family enjoys is largely because there are four adults with which to split the emotional labor, the financial labor, just all of it, right? So
Yeah.
it was important to me. It's always been important to me to be able to be an excellent mom, but also a whole person. Um,
Yes.
And so being able to be a whole person meant I get to show up to motherhood with two partners, right? Like we call ourselves the Mom-glomerate, right? So
I
when
love
we have
that.
hard momming days, it's us, right? We did it together. So Eli having three moms kind of it takes down the pressure of all these ridiculous standards of motherhood that our society has. And I mean,
Yes.
I say that, but I also say it still feels very hard because I am the only one of us who currently doesn't work for anyone besides myself. So what that means is that even though there are four of us, there's still some default parent stuff there, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
when Eli is sick, my day is the one that is instantly interrupted, right? My partners are
Right.
amazing, right? Everybody's going to whip out their calendar and see what we can make shake. But at the end of the day, I have the most ability to be flexible for our child. So we
Mm-hmm.
still, and because of that like default parent stuff, I spend not a lot. I make intentional time to be away from my family.
Yes.
Yeah, so I make intentional time to be away from the family so that I can recharge my batteries. I take trips, I go visit my friends, I do important stuff like that.
So important. And thank you for speaking on it. As you know, I mentioned earlier, someone who is about to become a mother this year, looking at the nuclear family and hearing from creators like you and Jess and Avita about, you know, what a sort of big facade it is that it's all possible to do with like two parents. And then that leaves out the entire population of single parents, right? It is just nearly impossible to live your life, like you said, as a whole person, still yourself, and show up every day, day in and out, for a child or children, and manage in this like, you know, crazy far gone capitalist patriarchal world that we live in.
Right.
And so the more people we have speaking about creating intentional families and creating this polyamorous life. For those of you listening, I have a lot of monogamous listeners. It doesn't even have to be the polyamorous
Right. And I
household,
kind of
but
want
it
to
could be any version of, yeah, like not the nuclear family. Go ahead.
Right, I wanna speak to that because I tell people all the time that, like, that's white people shit. It's absolutely white people shit. Like, I wasn't raised in a nuclear family. My parents have been
Mm-hmm.
married for 48 years, but to this day, I have very strong, healthy relationship with other adults who were deeply involved in my life, right? I have aunts, I have uncles, like, my parents' friends, those people actively participated in my life on a day-to-day basis. And so I don't really know where we started doing this thing where it was like, oh, nobody to help your child but you. And like, I think what happened
Right.
is the world got scary. And so the idea was, oh, because some people are scary, I'm going to insulate my child and myself so that only at best two adults are involved in their life. People started
Right.
moving away from their biological families, their families of origin,
Mm-hmm.
and, like, I can say in Eli is almost 8 years old, he'll be 8 in June, and he's had a babysitter that he's never had a babysitter that we didn't have a prior relationship with, and I've only paid 2 babysitters in my entire, like, life as a mother because he has aunts, and he has uncles, and we have family, right? And what a privilege to be able to say that, right? But
Absolutely. And thank you for, yeah. I There's so much here that I want to so many directions that we can go in, but thank you for speaking to it because I really want to get into the idea of culturally competent polyamorous education and talk because there is such a big difference. And you and I know it because like this is the world that we're in and the world that we like spend a lot of time in. But for people listening, there's such different representation across the board between like this white version of poly and everything and like bleeding into like wellness and all of that and like what's true and real for so many other cultures. And I only know what I've read in books, but I know that Black culture has been polyamorous and been community minded and village oriented for so long, as have like white people, but it's definitely a capitalist thing. I think that it's like mine this is my child, this is our home. Like, we don't share it, right? And that definitely stems from like colonialism, from yeah,
Sharing became associated with
mhm,
poverty. That's what
yeah,
happened. We have this idea that sharing things and having communal anything means that you're poor, right?
mhm,
When in reality, I know that for us, for my family, being communal about some things, especially financially, has been a positive indicator of wealth for us, right? And so
mm,
I think we need to like stop just kind of accepting the things that we are told, right? Because it's really easy to have a stay-at-home mom when you still have two incomes, right? It's a little
mhm,
harder to have a stay-at-home mom when that means there's only one income paying the bills. And
yeah.
so and just that single thought, right? Like, no, like for some people that's going to be this huge like light bulb that's never occurred to them. But like
I
there is
literally just wrote this down, actually, that you said like how community means poverty. I'm trying to scribble everything else you're saying
Mhm.
as fast as possible. Like, I can't go back and listen to it in an hour. But that was a huge light bulb for me, that I never connected the dots. But it is very true that I think that that's how people see the world, when it's entirely opposite. But that's come from, media and propaganda and the stories that we tell ourselves that aren't really true. That has really pushed people into this like ideal two-parent household,
Yeah, non-white families
where
have always lived cross-generationally to build wealth, right? Even if you think about
mhm,
myself, I didn't move out from my parents' house until I was 21, right?
yeah,
I lived very briefly. I rented very briefly, and my husband and I bought the house we live in now. I think I was 23. You know what I mean? So even when you think about the way that we're told to like go out in the world and make your own way, but like why? Why are we doing that?
right,
My big push is to question what you're told. Question like,
mhm,
is this really every action that you get ready to take in life? Like, is this pushing me closer or farther away from who I want to be? 'Cause a lot of the
mhm.
things that we're encouraged to do don't really make any sense.
Right. And it takes so much introspection and like examining of self to take this new knowledge, right? To take what you're hearing that you might be resonating with, or even if you're listening to this and you feel that this is like confronting for you, think about like what and why, and what meanings you're placing on words like nuclear family, or terms like nuclear family, because I know like that's a hot word for people. Like, I'll get people that write in and it's like, what's wrong with the traditional family? And it's like, well, you've assigned traditional family values to this idea of nuclear, right? Or we're talking about like whiteness, right? What meaning do we all assign like these terms to? Because just like share, people who listen to the show, like I talk a lot about like growing up in, a poorer household, but like white poor. And I say that all the time. I'm like, yeah, we were on welfare, and we actually did live multi-generationally for a long time. Like, my stepdad's dad lived with us, my mother's grandmother lived with us for a long time, my mother's mom lived with my brother and her. I was much older, for the last 10 years. But it's like, of course, we all have these very different lives and lifestyles. So rather than be triggered by a word or feel like this is confrontational, just examine what it means for you. I just like love bringing my listeners along, because I know what some people are thinking when we talk about this. And some people will tune out this conversation, but I think this is the most important conversation we can be having, is like culturally, the way that you put it, culturally competent education,
Right, because we
so
have
that we
to
can actually all understand each other.
and we have to know where we started from, right? So that's why
Mhm.
when I talk about like intentional polyamory, we start, right? We start any conversation of intentional polyamory, we start with self work, right? So it's like knowing who you are, what biases you're bringing to the conversation, what your past is, right? And like really knowing where you are in your journey of self, knowing what you want, what's important to you. And that's the first pillar, self work. And then we move to the second pillar, which is what kind of culture around your relationships are you trying to create? How do you want to feel in your relationships? What's your relational culture? right? Some people want to feel free. Some people want to feel rested, loved, abundant. Whatever it is that you're trying to create, you work backwards from that place. Like, what do I want for my relationships? And then you can create that through the third pillar, which is information sharing, right? If you want to feel loved and supported, there are kinds of things you have to share with your partners and with the people in your life so that they can support you. And without you having shared, like, even things about your past and how you grew up, if I don't know that you have a particular trigger around like bills being late, right? For me, if I grew up in a house where there was always enough money, I'm not gonna feel like it's like, oh, the bill is a one day late. It doesn't really matter, no big deal. But that could be a
Yeah.
huge deal for you, right? So the extent to which we have, but remember, we have to start. We have to know ourselves in order to be able to know what we want, in order to be able to share with our partners those things. And then the fourth pillar of intentional polyamory is community, right? Because
Mm.
nothing can exist without an ecosystem around it, right? So all relationships need support. You need a place to go. I talk about a lot in my coaching sessions, like, you need an am I tripping friend, right? You need someone. You can't be polyamorous, you can't be any kind of non-monogamous in a vacuum. Because if you don't have
Mm-mm.
if you're non-monogamous and you don't have non-monogamous friends, you're going to spin out very quickly. You must
Oh
have
yeah.
non-monogamous people you are not having sex with, so you can just have a conversation and you can be like,
Yep.
hey, or even ask stuff like, how did y'all do this? Like, have y'all, is this a challenge that you faced, and how did you guys face it? Right? So all
Mm.
those, I kind of have looked back on my polyamorous journey and identified these four pillars as these are the things along the way that helped me to build a life that supported my relationships. Because your life,
Mm.
you have to put an infrastructure in your life that supports the kind of relationships you have, or your relationships won't last.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the most important things I think we've covered so far is the community aspect. And it is so challenging to do this, to live this way, to really live a polyamorous life sanely if you don't have people to call.
Ooh.
What city are you in again? Remind me.
I'm in Atlanta.
You're in Atlanta. Okay.
Mhm.
So for everybody listening who's like, there's nobody where I live, I get that all the time. Like, you live in
Everybody says
LA, it's so
that.
easy. And I'm like, yeah, there are
And you say
so
it,
many
it's
places.
usually it's people in like Atlanta, DC, New York, Philadelphia, and I'm like, there's so many like polyamorous people where you live. But
So many.
and they can be like, literally, if you just apply yourself to a Google search, you can find your people. You really can.
Yes. And I just recently found Bloom communities, which I didn't even know existed, but it's all everything on the spectrum, kinky, queer, poly, and it's a lot of cool events, whether they're workshops, whether they're parties, but a lot of times it's just meetups, like hikes, and they're all over the country, all over the world. In fact, they're international. But yeah, the community aspect and having people to remind you like that it's not always easy and like they've been through it too, and to not question your choices but to just support you in them, because the people who do not understand non-monogamy will ask you the wrong questions and will have you thinking that you are crazy for making this choice, and the non-monogamy will always be like the scapegoat that they'll see
Right.
as the root of your
It's
issue
always going to be
rather
polyamory's
than your
fault.
trigger. Yeah, rather than the fact that like, you have a money conversation from when you were a kid, like you brought up earlier, the paying the bills thing being a trigger. And I've been through that. And so I know that it's just such a when you have that community, it makes this lifestyle so much easier. It really
Mhm.
does. Um,
And
so
it's
thank you for
also,
bringing that up.
I wanted to like, so going back to like the when I first kind of encountered Evita and like how that kind of played out for me. Um
Yeah.
I was introduced to earlier this year, I was introduced to the concept of possibility modeling. And the idea of possibility modeling is that we need to see people who are similar to us doing things that are similar to what we want to do. Right. So a lot of people, and in 2019, when my co-founder and I started Black Poly Pride, we realized that if you looked on the internet alone, you thought that polyamory was something that only people, upper middle class white people did, right? And
Mm-hmm.
if you are a Black person who feels moved and like pushed towards non-monogamy, but an immediate turnoff is going to be that people like you, who look like you, don't do it, right? And
Right.
so it's important to see. For me, I realized I had to start speaking up because I was doing it every day, right? And I was doing it successfully and happily, in non-toxic ways, right? And
Yeah.
I wanted to let other people who naturally loved the way that I love know that it's not just something that upper middle class white people do, you know? Now there are
Yeah.
things in our society that make it much easier for those people to be out about it, right? But that's
Mm-hmm.
what I have largely found personally and professionally is that it's just who has the privilege of speaking out about it, not who's doing it.
Right. Because in my experience, as I've started to do the research, uh, if you're listening and you don't know my full story, we were very closeted and very private for the first 5 years of non-monogamy. And for the last 5, we've been, out and whatever. But um, I thought it was taboo. We did it without a guide, just kind of navigating on our own. It wasn't until like year 7, 8 that I started this podcast that I started to read books, find content creators, and discover this whole world, which is such a backwards way, but it was my way, whatever. And that's when I found that in my experience, I'm seeing now that I've done the digging that actually Black people are practicing and living in such a deeper rooted experiences of polyamory and probably in greater numbers than I would say like white culture. And it's so interesting that we only actually see it from white culture in media, online, and spaces like that. And it's wild to
We
know that
live in a
that's what
racist
happened.
society. We live in a racist
Yeah.
society. And so the voices, white people are writing the articles, so they're picking white people to be in the articles, right? White people have people who have more money, people who have more privilege in general, and I include myself in that people who have more privilege, right? I have the benefit of being able to only do work that I care about, right? If I was the primary breadwinner for my family and I had to be primarily concerned with paying the bills, I wouldn't be sitting here with you today, right? So even
Right.
my ability to speak out about my polyamory is supported by my partner's ability to care for our family abundantly, right? So
Yeah.
everyone has to check their privilege when we come and sit down with this conversation. There's a lot of people that are doing
Hmm.
polyamory every day, but they're at work, right? So they
Right.
can't talk to you
Yeah.
about it. They can't create content about it. They can't take the time to amass 100,000 followers on Instagram because they're at work.
Right. And to go even deeper into what you're saying, like it's often not safe. It's just not as safe for, any kind of minority to live a lifestyle that's like not traditional or not conservative because you're already so at risk for violence all the time
Mhm.
and for being marginalized and for being, you know, your work to be taken advantage of or your work to be valued less than your white counterpart. So I just I feel like it's so important to say, and I'm so
And
grateful that we're having this conversation.
and to
Thank
that
you
point,
for speaking
largely
to this.
what's happening now, right? So the pandemic caused an explosion of polyamorous content creators, right? But as
Mm-hmm.
someone who has been doing this work publicly for quite some time, right? Google me in case you need to fact check that. What has happened is that my work and the work of other femmes of color is now being regurgitated by people with large followings, and then the money and the shine and the bandwidth is being assigned to content creators as opposed to the educators who are the originators of the work. That's something that you're always going to
Mm,
hear me talking about, and it's a thing that's happening.
yeah.
So I remind people whenever you are taking in content, make sure that you never take advice from someone who's not where you want to be.
Mm,
I think that's
yeah.
good life advice, period. But particularly when it comes to non-monogamy, right? There's absolutely something to be gained from having done it wrong. But and I tell people this when I'm working with them as a coaching, in a coaching modality, is that I can tell you all the ways that I fucked it up, but I can also come and tell you how I've come back and got it right. Right. And those two parts are what make this a beneficial conversation, right? If I am
Yes.
if I've just fucked it up and haven't quite figured it out, it's cool to be like, I can be your friend, but am I someone you go to for advice? Right. So always,
Mm,
always stop and check where you're getting your advice from, right? Because another
I
sick person, the doctor, it's not it.
I fucking love that so much, and it reminds me, I I feel like one of the best things about good educators, coaches, whatever, guides, whoever you're working with, is when they can say, "You know what? I don't know, but let's go find somebody who does, or let's go
Right.
find someone who that's their lived experience," right? That's when you know you actually have like a solid person in your corner.
Right.
Because yeah, I mean, it's hard for people, like, it's hard for people's egos, I don't know why, to be like, "Oh, I actually don't have all the answers,"
No,
moreover
I
the
feel
deeper
very
thing of, like, not
confident.
enoughness is, but,
There's
like,
a list
yeah.
of things I'm really, really good at and I know how to do, right? But like if you ask me like, oh, how do I navigate polyamory and divorce? I'm gonna be like, oh, you call it Vita, baby, because I don't know nothing about that. Like
Yeah.
that's the answer, right?
Yeah.
That's the answer. You have to be able to
Mhm.
say, these are the things I'm really good at, and these are the things we're gonna have to find somebody else, right? So I
Yeah.
think everyone should be a conscientious consumer of content. I think is a really
Mhm.
important message that I want to spill out.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you wanna share on this topic that we're, like, really excavating here? Like, just being competent, right? In all like cultural ways and in all the ways that are diverse for people who are listening. Just let's leave nothing on the table. Is there
Right. No,
anything else you
I
want to
think
share?
that the really big thing is to remember that there's nothing new under the sun. So as you take in things and as you decide how you're going to spend your resources, and things like that, make sure that you are being conscientious in how you take in polyamorous content, and make sure you're starting at self-work, guys. Like if you try and jump in the pillars of intentional polyamory, if you try and jump in and focus on what your partners are doing, or if you try and focus on community before you even know who you are, if you do it out of order, you're not going to get the same results, right? So there is a path and there is an order, that will help you to build this intentionally polyamorous life. And it all starts with you knowing who you are and doing the work to like know what your strengths are, know what your weaknesses are, and be actively working towards shoring those up.
Mm, thank you. Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
good. Oh my gosh. You know what? I just remembered, I'm excited for everybody who's listening to this on day one, because if you pop over to our Instagram, Chaneé is actually doing Instagram takeover for those of you that are listening to this, like the day that it comes out. So I'm sure that she's sharing lots of goodness on there, like insert date here. I'll tell my editor, and
Right.
hopefully we can make it happen on that exact day if it works with your schedule. But I want to ask, I want to kind of go back into your personal life just a little bit before we chat about your work that you're doing with the Day Lovers. Are you planning on having more kids and growing this polycule, growing this family? Like, what are your current desires in that realm?
Oh, that's a TBD for me. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe. Um, I think
Okay.
that I think that more children are definitely in my life plan, but I'm not sure if it's an immediate thing. So
Okay.
that I will say, I'm
Cool.
going to be somebody else's mama one day.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm thinking with 3 mamas, like, are we having more babies? Yeah, okay, cool. Well, we will definitely stay on that journey watching,
Right, I'm gonna pop out with a baby. You guys, we're
I'm
gonna totally pop out with a baby.
on the day that we do the Instagram takeover, you'll just
Like,
be holding an infant now. Okay, cool. And as far as, like, because these are the questions that I get from people all the time, which is not how my mind works. But now that I've been doing a podcast for long enough, I tend to think about what are people thinking. Is there a desire to add more just family members in general to like your living situation because you're all under one roof? How
Okay,
are you
so
growing a community? Yeah.
so three of us live together and one of us lives separately. There are no current plans to change that in either direction. All four of us do date as we see fit, and are dating as we see fit. So, when you're poly the way that I'm poly, you have to make sure that when you like make certain appearances, like I'm not claiming anybody. I am dating. Let's just put that out there. My partners also have other partners. Um, who knows what tomorrow will bring. Our current home doesn't have any more space for any more people. Um, but we're also not going to stay here forever, and I don't think any of us are opposed to the idea of sharing space with someone else. But it would just,
Mhm.
sometimes it's like, oh, it would have to be perfect, and the reality is
Right.
it might be perfect, right? So
Yeah.
like like we don't have this like master cult like commune plan, right? That's not our lane.
Hmm.
But we are not opposed. We're not like our polyamory is not closed. So it's not like
Right.
if somebody else wants to have another partner, we won't have to sit down and vote about it, right? We all have other partners
Mm.
to the extent that we want to. And I could definitely see myself, like I could see myself living with another partner part-time, or like building lives that work for all of us, right? And because there's four of us raising one child at present, it does give us more flexibility to be
Yeah.
able to show up to other relationships.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. People always want to know. They're like, they're like, we have to have the latest. Like
Right.
even in my relationships, it's like, what's going on with you and Lauren? And she's in love. We see she's in love with somebody else. Like, great,
Mhm.
But it's such a great demonstration of like, yeah, this is your polycule. You're raising a child together, and you all have other partners. And that goes back to you speaking in the beginning. I just want to highlight it again because I think it's so important of being a whole person and a parent. Like you get to have both. You do not have to sacrifice,
Absolutely.
That's
And
beautiful. Okay.
okay, go
Yeah.
ahead. Okay.
No, no, no.
I was
You
just gonna
first.
say that, like, I was gonna say that being able to date, right, as we see fit is part of it's part of like our relational culture, right? It's part of our relational culture that we should all have the freedom to date as we desire, right? Our desire to date wanes based on our personality and what else is going on in our life. But it's really easy to like put a date on the calendar, or like I have like a weekend with a partner planned in a couple of days, and it's like, you look at the calendar, you see what else is going on. We try to make sure that two parents, that unless we're all going somewhere together, that there's always two hands on deck, right? And if there aren't two
Yeah.
hands on deck, we're calling in an auntie, because we don't want
Hmm.
any of us to have an emotionally impoverished experience of parenting. That's not what we want. So we're very
Mm.
intentional about the way that we plan time away from our child, and try to make sure that everyone has access to it.
I love it so much. It's like people are always so worried about the kids in polyamory. Meanwhile, this is like the most overloved child ever. Like
Literally.
he's gonna come up in the world and be like, this world does not have enough love, and like change everything. People are always like so concerned, and it's like yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
and the
that's what
child
I'm
has
excited
multiple
for because
loving adults in a child's life a bad thing? Like, it means he has more people to pick him up from school and like attend his basketball games. I don't understand.
exactly. Yeah. Let's talk about this because I want to highlight the work that you're doing with Jess. Um, and they just the Day Lovers just published their book, Polyamory and Parenting. It's incredible. Everyone must grab it. We're gonna link it in the show notes. And then you and Jess are actually doing an
Oh,
intentional poly.
so intentional polyamory is my thing. Jessica has been absolutely amazing in like making sure that it has seen the light of day and that everyone has known it. So what happened? This is how Jess is involved in intentional polyamory. So as you know, we did those lives, right? And so our intention in the live was to really just talk about what creating a life where parenting was a part of our polyamory, what that looked like. And we did a part one. It was great. It went really well. And then we signed up to do part two, where we could really delve into like how, parenting came out. And as I was doing my bullet points, like just to what we were talking about in the live, I realized that those bullet points, those 4 pillars of intentional polyamory, those were the bullet points. That's what I said.
Mm.
That's how you create a life that supports your polyamory. And so intentional polyamory, which is like it's my baby. It was born in that live, right? And so what I've been able to experience is it is a the first one was 5 weeks, but the next one will be 6 weeks. And we work through each of the pillars of intentional polyamory, and we do exercises. We have intentional conversations with our partners. It's something that I would encourage people to come to independently. If your partner wants
Mm-hmm.
to do it as well, that's great. But it is absolutely something that you need to come to as a whole person. And you need to come knowing that you're going to have to define what you want in polyamory for yourself and not as a unit. It is something
Mm.
you do alone, right? And it's alone, but in community. Because
Right.
the community that people have found in the intentional polyamory cohort, like it's literally been life changing. It has made it so that we are still talking. The very first cohort, we're still talking every day.
Wow.
It is it's creating community, but through the act of like figuring out what you want your polyamorous life to look like. Because again, we talk about concepts
Mm.
a lot. Like polyamorous content creators, we talk about jealousy and we talk about dating and we talk about calendaring. But like what the reason why I created intentional polyamory is because nobody was saying, I am willing to start with you at, okay, so I think I want to have more than one partner, and take you to, this is what that looks like functionally. These are the conversations I need to have. This is what I need to figure out. And so people who find themselves, wherever place you happen to be in your polyamorous journey, if you are just starting out, or maybe you've been doing it for a while, but you think that maybe you would like to be more intentional and structured with the way that you are approaching it, then I encourage people to um, either join a cohort, or that's also how I do my coaching, right? So um, plan for at least 4 sessions, because we're going to take you through every single pillar of intentional polyamory, and we're going to say, how are you setting up your life around this, right? Like, are you doing these things? Because each pillar builds on the other. That's going to take you to a place where at the end of the program, you at the very least know what you need to do, right? You might not be
Mm.
done with the work, but you will have a clear blueprint for what you need to do. So,
Yes.
and there,
Okay, awesome. So you not only do this in the group cohort way, like in that dynamic, but you also do this one-on-one. And I knew you were, one-on-one coaching people anyway, but you'll take the same format with the pillars
right.
and take your one-on-one clients through that journey.
Absolutely. And
Amazing.
the intentional
Yeah, thank
polyamory
you for
workbook,
clarifying.
yeah, the intentional polyamory workbook is in process, and is planning to. My intention is to release it on my birthday, which is May 21st. So we shall see. That gives me 2 months to kind of perfect it and get it out to my test group. So we will see how that goes.
Oh my God, I'm writing this down and so we can celebrate your birthday.
Listen, I'm a big
Uh,
birthday girl too, and it's so funny. Somebody was like, "You're working on your birthday." I was like, "I mean, it's another thing to celebrate."
yeah, that's like what the end of Taurus season. You're like,
I end
okay,
Taurus and begin Gemini.
yes, yes. Oh my gosh, so exciting. Well, I cannot wait for this book to come out. Again, thank you for going through the whole program and for educating me because I did think that it was a co-creation and I'm so like it's awesome to hear that this is your baby,
It's my
right?
baby.
This is like the work that you're doing. This is your offering and Jess is so is it both of you in the group sessions in the cohorts
No,
coaching?
it's just me.
Just you.
Mhm.
Okay.
And so
All right, cool.
what I have been helping I tell Jess all the time, I'm like, you know, as she seeks her balance and like showing up to content creation, showing up to motherhood, and showing up to being a whole person, she, you know, we have been kind of working together. And sometimes you just need somebody to tell you, like, it's okay to take time off, right? It's okay to take time
Yes.
off. It's okay to delay a project. It's okay to do all those
Mm,
things in service to like being a whole person. So that's, you know,
yes.
it's nice to find community around like I want to show up well to all of these things.
Yes. And other mamas and sisters who just have your back.
Yes.
And it's like we'll all still be here
Right.
doing
You know,
doing the
you
shit
need
that we're
somebody to
doing.
text
And
and be like, "Yo, I don't think I'm getting out of bed today," right? And the kind of friends that I
mhm.
have when I'm like, I'm all burnt out and I can't get out of bed today. I need somebody who's going to be like, "Okay, what do you want for lunch? I'm going to send it to your door. You don't have to, you know what I mean? Like that is the kind of support and loving community that I am seeking to create around to continue to create around me, I think. Is the
Mm. Beautiful. And that's exactly what you'll attract. I love what you said earlier about, this isn't, we don't have this big grand plan, but we're also not closed off. We're open. And if something perfect, like it has to be perfect to come into our lives, and likely it will, because like that's how you see it.
right, and the idea is
And I think that's,
when you have something good, you can always be open to better.
yes, yes, so well said. Wow. Chaneé, thank you so much for sharing your vision, for sharing your life in the way that you do. I love I have to like laugh actually, and because people who listen to the show that kind of know my partners are also pretty private. And by being in a relationship with me, sometimes their life is a little bit on display, but I also get to navigate that so that I'm not putting their intimate experiences on blast, but still sharing my truth,
Right.
as you said. And it's funny, my husband's like, delete my name from everything. But he's like, I'm like, they're gonna find it. Like,
Right, like,
all
you
you
know
have to
they
do is
can
like,
Google it, and he's like, "Well, make them Google it, damn it." Cool, that's fine.
yeah, which is really cute for them. But I just appreciate that because it really does show people that this is possible. This is the life that we lead. We navigate it the way that we all do in our own reality. Like we all have such a different version of that reality, but it's so important to hear the reality from, everyone else and the other person, who doesn't look like you, but maybe has some of the same experiences. And hearing from your insight is so valuable to people like me and my listeners. So I'm so grateful, and also I'm taking like all the good polyamorous mama stuff
Oh, I'll be
and
here.
putting
I'm
it in my
so
pocket.
excited for you. And and I think one of the things about motherhood, right, is it's incredibly humbling, right? It does not matter. I remember we were talking to our housekeeper. I was like 8 months pregnant, and she at the time, my housekeeper at the time had 5 children. And she was like, I just want y'all to know that when that baby comes, she was doing what would be the final clean of our house before baby came. And she was like, I want y'all to know that you're just gonna be walking around this house like zombies because babies don't sleep. And we were like, we won't have that problem. There are 3 of us. And because there are 3 of us, we will all be well rested and fine. Let me tell you something. We were walking around this house like zombies. So polyamory or not, children, babies particularly will humble you. So just know I will always be here for the like 2 a.m. Like the baby won't sleep. It's okay. Just turn on a show. Don't fight it. Turn on a show and watch it till they fall
Mm,
asleep. Like
yeah.
surrender to parenting is like the best advice that I can give a new mom.
Surrender to parenting. I love it. So, so grateful. Thank you so much for chatting with us today. And definitely hop over to our Instagram because Chaneé is rocking it, sharing a lot of this information and more in depth. And make sure you follow her and her work. And who knows, maybe when we release this episode, it'll be right in line with the book release.
Who
So,
knows? Let's stay tuned.
yeah, stay tuned. All right, loves. See you next week. All right, loves. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you're on YouTube, make sure you are subscribed on all of these different platforms. The links are in the show notes. I am off. If you are listening to this in May, I am off on all of the travel. So if you want to check out the events that we're having in Israel, in Portugal, in the UK, head over to openlatepodcast.com to register or get tickets to these upcoming events and hear me speak all about, non-monogamy. See you next week.